Very glad that you have decided to enlist with us. Please take a seat anywhere. Anywhere is where you may take your seat. It doesn't matter, for when we sit down in space. And we will teach you how to depend on gravity when all else has fallen to pieces. It has been more than 100 years since our last conversation, O young one. When you last departed my study, you did so with a recommendation letter to Louis XVI in your attaché. As instructed, you took up the brush to join the court painter's rank, which have been informed by our physiognomic scientia ever since we first began to form the public mind in line with our strict accordance. On the limestones erected at Mennefer, Memphis, Hennesute, Heracleopolis Magna, those long, pure dynastic years before the unification, when our symbol was built in unsurpassed stone and man and his woman knew their place. For of course there is nothing left to chance when one paints that which impresses appropriate behavior in death's moment. Impresses what the afterlife looks like and what exactly it is the Lord who dwells there demands. This generous gift, what we call a perception. Our seal, which we give so freely to those who do not want to have their lingering memories devoured by wild jackals. Their stuff cast to the winds that blow in the nameless desert. And those are indeed many, if not all, once we have taught them how to fear properly. Our seal bearers relieve the laborer from his spontaneous visions so that he may instead focus on what is important in preparation. Eternal life is not a gift bestowed by nature, it is bestowed by those whom you paint, and your paint makes that clear. I, for one, have never received anything but thanks for alleviating the weak minds from their confusion. Confusion about the good that is moral necessity, and the good that is that subnormal illiterate female feeling. Should someone claim erroneously that one must only do what is right, that there is something deeper, a guide in all hearts which our pergaments or hieroglyphs engraved on the gate of the law mistook, then I ask, why do the whores moan when they are raped? As I said, much blood has flowed across the cobblestone since we last met, and though there are voices concerned about your efforts, I want to make it clear as your father that I do not blame you for the fate that met our king. I do also not blame you for the farcical shortcomings of the Bourbon Restoration. No, we must look further. Neither physiognomy nor phrenology will no longer suffice now that the toilers are revolting. There is no point in separating the chaff from the wheat with these winnowing tools if the entire crop has spoiled. We must clean up the threshing area, gather the wheat into his barn, and burn the chaff with never-ending fire. In this oven we shall shape the head before it is measured. The Kabbalists misgauged themselves to make golems. For Adam was made with clay, but they could go no further, for their automatons had no ribs. We turn the formula on its head, which is our traditional fief, and instead shall make with clay from ribs. Do you understand what I am telling you? In the marrow of the bone the skin is decided, and so is the shape of the skull which holds the brain which must think our thoughts. There was never any more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, and will never be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven and hell than there is now. Urge and urge and urge, always the procreant urge of the world. We have had this power for a long time. In the 11th century, Paramara King Boya of Dar, lord of the Rajputs of the Indian North, almost gave the game away when he told of our technology in the Samarangana, whole chapters devoted to describing his airships whose tails spout fire and quicksilver. What a fool, to say nothing of his letting people in on the secrets of the Samhara, the Moha, the Aishika and Astra weapons of brain motor control and paralysis, or the atom fire which we are now finally rediscovering in our advanced alchemy. The Aryan architect, whom he even dares to refer to by name, Sutradhara, the mysterious artisan, should be so plainly revealed to common eyes, almost earned the old poet king a hanging, until one of our censors ordered him to add, quote, "not explain how to construct such machines for the sake of secrecy, and not due to lack of knowledge," end of quote. Recall the Mahabharata. Quote, "It was as if the elements had been unleashed. The sun spun round, scorched by the incandescent heat of the weapon. The world reeled in fever. Elephants were set on fire by the heat and ran to and fro in a frenzy to seek protection from the terrible violence. The water boiled, the animals died, the enemy was mown down, and the raging of the blaze made the trees collapse in rows as in a forest fire. The elephants made a fearful trumpeting and sank dead to the ground over a vast area. Horses and war chariots were burnt up, and the scene looked like the aftermath of a conflagration. Thousands of chariots were destroyed. Then deep silence descended on the sea. The winds began to blow and the earth grew bright. It was a terrible sight to see. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat, so that they no longer looked like human beings. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon, and never before have we heard of such a weapon. You know of all this, I am certain, and furthermore it has little importance for your task ahead. How our disciples studied the atom fire scientia, since indeed we want you to study under our masters at the fountain of life. The atom water scientia is your natural quarters of progression. More fitting then for you is this verse, quote, "O Sanjaya, I had no hope of success. When I heard that Asvatthama, while being pursued by Bhimasena, had discharged the fire of tools called Aishika, by which the embryo in the womb was wounded, then, O Sanjaya, I had no hope of success." This is the fear we will instill in them. To fear what we may do to them during their many reincarnations before they are born. Did you know that when first discovered, viruses were thought to be an intermediary step between life and non-life? In an inert state, it was seen much like an inorganic crystal, but when active, it acts with a purposeful manner, and you must shepherd it with a purposeful manner, for we all know what will come from those who work the Adamic clay with inexperienced hands. Why else do you think in the instructions by our forefathers we find the mermaid, man-fish, centaur, man-horse, satyr, man-goat, harpy, man-bird, and the sphinx, man-lion? And there are other well-known combinations: Pegasus, horse, bird, griffin, bird, lion, capricorn, goat, fish, and the gargoyle, ape, bird. Crystal and clay shall from now on be your mediums. 5,000 years ago, during our Sumerian reign, we put down legends to speak of a time when godmen ruled the world of prehistory. And in order to work the mines of the land of Apsu, what we now call Southern Africa, the Sumerian deities decided to create a Lulu, or primitive worker, who would do the actual digging and other hard labor. J.R. Jochman, an old scholar in the borderland who I took to inform and have been informed by, told me that the god Enki was placed in charge of the task to, quote, bring about the work of great wisdom, end of quote, and he, with the mother goddess Ninhursag, began to fashion the Lulu. The place where the creation took place was called the Bitshimti, the, quote, house where the breath of life is breathed in, end of quote. Upon entering the house, quote, Ninhursag first washed her hands, end of quote, as any lab worker would, and called to her lab assistants to prepare the first ingredient. Quote, mix the core of clay from the depths of the earth in Apsu and shape it into the form of a core. I have knowledgeable young gods who will bring the clay to the right condition, end of quote. The Akkadian term for clay is tit, but in its earliest spelling, ti'it, it also meant that which has life. In the Hebrew, tit means mud, with its synonym bos related to bissa, marsh, and bessa, egg. These connotations, do not forget them. Clay, marsh, egg speak about stages of development in the creation of the cell. First, the substance began as clay. Clay from the bottom of the primordial seas was the original, ideal catalyst. Clay has a crystalline structure that has the ability to retain and print a pattern upon new material. As a magic smith of the future will come to note, quote, clay consists of stacks, thin interlocking plates containing aluminium and silicon atoms that can be arranged in random patterns. These patterns can undergo changes as new clay stacks print near old layers, end of quote. This is a system capable of development by natural selection and by our trial and error. They were the first stages necessary to produce molecules and arrangements of molecules that would eventually form the more complex systems of early life when our architect made his blueprint. The next stage of the clay development, according to the Hebrew Akkadian word connotations, was, as I told you, marsh. That is, the clay material was mixed with simple organic material, as one finds in marshland ooze. In the Sumerian texts, this is seen in the mother goddess Ninhursag's command that chemicals called, quote, bitumens of Apsu, end of quote, be used to purify or impregnate, quote unquote, the clay. Bitumen is a petroleum substance made up of very complex hydrocarbon chains, the basis of organic chemistry. the basis of our Lord's Udic force. What is described in essence is that organic chains were mixed in the clay, and the clay patterns began to print the chains into more complex structures. The chromosomal strings that gave their labored mutants appearance. You don't believe me. This was already your task as a sculptor, and this shaping process's direction you must learn from the young gods, who in the ancient texts as lab assistants shaped the clay into a specific mold, bringing it into the quote-unquote right condition. Enki, the text states, further ordered the assistants to, quote, bind upon the mixture the mold of the gods, end of quote, or carefully design the organic material into the genetic codes of a human-like creature. The result in the last stage was the formation of an egg or cell. Oh, Lance, my old friend, you caught us at the most auspicious moment. I was just about to tell the young man about the Sumerian egg, as it were. Dear lad, would you be so kind as to follow Senor von Liebenfeld to his quarter? He will not speak until you have arrived, so curb your curiosity until you stand to gaze at the fountain of life by his window. Lance, tell our sculptor all about the egg and what has to be done. Go easy on him, and I will see the both of you in a few weeks' time. Hurry along now, I'm already late. The Pope wants to see me.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Nej, ha det tyst bara, för då tror jag smarta människor, de borde ju kunna deducera det med tanke på vad det här är. Liksom, varför börjar vi prata om, du vet, animal breeding och så här insemination och sånt. Så.
Okej. Ja, men då kör vi så då. Ja, men det blir väl bra. Okej. Hello and welcome to the much anticipated second season of the Skull Boys. I have with me, of course, my comrade in arms, Sebbe. Sebbe, would you like to address the audience?
It's good to be back. But the subject matter has been quite dark. So I'm happy to sit down and record this and to get on with my life now.
Yeah. Exactly. Like we haven't even started the first episode, and I'm always like, I'm already feeling the like this creeping sensation in my brain that like I'm running out of air. Like that is like need to get out of this room, man. Yeah. You already had like your first nightmare, and I don't know. Yeah, people. When I announced that we were gonna do this, somebody like in the chat or in the comments were like, "Yeah, it's been too long since you put Sebbe through some psychic Durez, Duras, maybe it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, the problem is that like this is a joint partnership. So like everything I put you through, I have to do myself. It's a very strange relationship. It can't be referred to as like sadomasochistic because it's like we have to do everything we force the other person to do. It's some kind of like, you know, absurd. What's it called? Like buttoning, but in English, like.
Oh yeah,
hazing,
when they have,
right?
that they have in the public schools.
Exactly, It's some kind of weird parapolitical hazing, just dragging each other through this.
Yeah, it's not a healthy relationship, that's for sure.
No, but we have many healthy years in our past that we can remember before we started to do this to each other. So we will survive. For those who don't remember, I have started to go through a little bit the backlog of the first season, which was well received. I'm glad that so many people commented on it, and that like people are sending mails asking for an update and like maybe an extension, and second season basically. So I was thinking I'll just go through, and you will help me, Sebbe, as long as it's like fresh in your mind, like the wounds that are still left in the psyche of what it was that we tried to do last time. And so we started off with like a national treasure of ours, right? Carl von Linné, a contemporary of Swedenborg.
Yeah, that was right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they are important enough that it will be impossible for us not to mention them again during the second season. I'm already thinking about some things where I've seen them pop up again. That first episode was set in the 1700 mainly, right? And we even suggested that because of like Linné's own approach to science, he was more actually like a person of the Baroque, like the 1600 maybe, than he was an Enlightenment man. And so even though we started like in the days of the Enlightenment, which most people do when it comes to like science and things like that, it's in a way the thoughts are older, especially like with Swedenborg as well. You have like this kind of lingering theosophical tradition that has been obviously going on, I guess, as long as there has been Christianity, like insofar that Gnosticism is some kind of like apocryphal Christianity. Again, this will return as well, I think, because as you will see, we're going to start somewhere in the same period. But then what did we do, Sebbe? This was very much like natural history. If we're going to summarize it outside the personalities, this was very much like a short adding up the various sciences that comes to the fore during this period. And they are mainly, so like we had this big signifier, which was natural history. And then out of this, we derived, for example, linguistics. No, sorry, that was the second episode. In the first episode, it was mainly anthropology, right? Physical anthropology.
I think I haven't actually listened to the episodes. So it's been, is it 2 years? Some was like the first recording. But if I remember correctly,
2024. It was 1 year.
Maybe 1.5 year or something. Yeah. But
summer last year.
I think if I recall, like the first one, like you said, it was about Linné. This is how we got started with it. Basically the idea of comparative biology, right?
Yes, anatomy. Comparative anatomy.
Exactly, and all like the sciences that spawn from that. So then we moved on to anatomy and how they did this same classification system on the human.
We had like
genome.
five different kinds of like phrenologists, right? Like
there are like more than that, but basically it's like different. I think we call them like expansion packs. Like they build on each other, and they. It's like a subculture within science, and they are all of this, fictitious debate going back and forward, like
how to measure the skull, basically.
Exactly, and then we also saw that Linné, of course, he was very unagreeable guy, right?
In many ways.
Basically started a cult.
Exactly. A Swedenborgian cult of natural historians, which he called his apostles, and who, more than half of them died on their post. Some far-flung place in we had some very gruesome stories. Do you remember?
The guy that cut out his eyes. What was it like?
No. He slit his throat, and then whilst bleeding out, he loaded like an 18th century musket and shot himself in the head, and it was just blood everywhere. Oh.
What have I done?
Yes. This was, I think, basically our conclusion. That what we started to realize was that the age of exploration and this nobility of the Enlightenment, it's all we traced it back to a trauma of not wanting to be European. Things are already going to shit around this time. Dirty cities, industry. Life will never be the same again. But we suggested that why we started in these days was that at least you can see some kind of human expression here, some kind of curiosity, and at the same time some kind of human anxiety, as the example that we just brought up. It's not just morbid. I think it was also something.
Yeah, it hasn't become, just the data sets and...
Exactly. It still has... they have to do everything, write by hand with a feather pen, the name of every commodity and catalog everything. And so there is some kind of romanticism to it. And that's how we got into romanticism then. This was the second episode. And that was when we also picked up the second leg of this whole project of the Western ontological... expansion across the world, of informing the rest of the world and trying to force them to be European.
Yeah, and also
which
the
was
project of linguistics, right? Yeah, and
that's the second leg. What I mean.
Since that episode, I've been speaking to people in private, and I think that one is the hardest pill for a lot of people to swallow, even
Definitely.
on the left-leaning side. That you can't trust linguistics, and that it's basically a made-up science. And I think that, of course, if those that I spoke to are, academics or petit bourgeois. I don't think somebody from the working class, they don't have a problem with this. Of course, it's a mistrust of what people do within academia. But for a lot of people that maybe have a bachelor degree or something, they want to see that but even linguistics is fucked up. Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think and also what we kind of stressed time and time again was that also that it's not so much the methodology of it which is wrong. I think if we actually had a better society, we could use these comparative methods. There's nothing inherently wrong with the practice of, let's say, archaeology or the practice of linguistics.
No, of course. I
don't know, it's just that everything that has come out of this factory so far seems to be predominantly racist shit. That try to back up this whole ontological project of colonialism and imperialism and the culminations of the First and the Second World War and everything that comes with that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at I don't know if we brought it up, but archaeology was very successful in China, right? Under both the Great Leap Forward and also the Great Cultural Revolution. That was when they, for example, found the terracotta army.
Exactly.
So of course, archaeology, if you have based on a correct analysis of class, etc., you can it can be very useful. But as long as you start to think about it in terms of, Indo-Europeans and all of these fantasy races, with dwarves and elves and etc. You basically become like a psychotic.
It's like a perverse historical subjectivity, which is completely like devoid of, dialectical materialism, and completely devoid of also. The reason why, let's say, the Soviet Union and China wanted to foster a historical subjectivity was, of course, for people to realize like how we came here, like, because of class struggle, because of like, your parents had to fight for something, if it, let's say, was the second generation in these countries, and it wasn't given to us, which seems to be, that's always that's always how it appears in bourgeois history writing, that either, and an older history writing as well, right? Like it's given by God, or like it's given by nature itself, or just the general benevolence of the historical Geist, like the Weltgeist, just sort of spreads good things around it,
and we see that, I think, in that episode as well, because looking back at those times, we can see that the idea of a nation is starting to take form. Exactly. And that's why they can be like, but Dutch is the Ur language, for example. And today I think that is very commonplace, not to think that Dutch is the Ur language, but this idea of reading history as like talking about Dutch people in the 8th century, when nobody living in that area thought of themselves as Dutch. So it's this is something you always see reading bourgeois history, that they talk about like the idea of a Swedish nation, Swedish people, English people, etc., etc. So
and their colonies as well, like Japan. I mean, you see that in Asia too, like Indonesia. I think now things are happening in Nepal. You always see this kind of clash of like actual praxis and sort of like. The modernist project of the nation state isn't, again, a completely ridiculous thing when we compare it to like what was before, with aristocrats. Buying mercenaries from different countries and fighting wars for other reasons.
Yeah.
But again, but maybe, just exactly the way that you described it now, this kind of retroactive positioning of the historical subject in this way of like inventing things, and that's what I think we started to talk about a little bit more in the third episode, right? Like the Dunes of Death, we call it. Like if anybody thinks these names are silly, I think everybody got it already, right? That we're trying to do the album covers a little bit like Indiana Jones style, right? And then it's gonna be like these stupid like names, the same as like
always like the
Temple of Doom, and
it's like reading bourgeois history books. They have names like that, It's always like this, like German blood, germs and blood and steel and stupid.
Exactly. You think about the weapons, germs and steel, right? Like as if those, this kind of reductionist mumbo jumbo. Yes. So in the third one, we did start to talk about some of the most famous retroactivists, then let's call it, like Swedish explorers that were very important for the rest of the Europeans who did adhere to this kind of those last stages of Aryo-heroic history writing, which started to believe in Nordicism towards the end of the 1800s. Then you see a big wave, obviously, in Sweden and the Nordic countries of like, okay, everybody thinks we are, the urfolk and the urheimat is over here. We have to start doing something about this.
Yeah, time to cash in.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And then we started to look at our favorite Sven Hedin, and we followed him around. We saw how geography, another science of the bourgeoisie, how it was connected to like, the great game and early spy apparatuses, how like modern intelligence apparatuses were directly overlapping with so-called geographers. And then of course you also see the same thing with archaeology, because all these things like sort of went hand in hand, right? And then we had another explorer who was also the founder of, or not the founder, his father was maybe the big founder, but he was one of the most influential phrenologists ever. So he really like he carried the burden of unifying Europe in a single kind of racism. So like all these kind of disputes that had been before about how to measure the skull, he solved that, and this was our guy Gustav Retzius, right, Sebbe?
Yeah.
Yes.
And parallel with that, we can see, that they all have this morbid curiosity with like death, right?
Mm-hmm. And skulls particularly, right?
Yeah. It's they care more about collecting skulls than maybe, finding a hammer or a pair of scissors. Yes. Usually it's like
or jewelry, God forbid.
Yeah, it's like treasure and skulls. That's what's important,
Exactly. If it's gold, that could, things that they can relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so we went through, that was a 2-part thing, right? Like, because you and me have been chasing Sven Hedin especially for a very, very long time, right? And so I think that became a 2-parter, rather heavy thing, 6 hours almost in total. And then we moved on towards, or like we didn't really move on. We were sort of in the same area, but rather than the German Scandinavian focus, we took the other side of the Great Game, or like I guess the original side, like insofar that it was England, which sort of tried to become like it's wrong to maybe only say that it was like in England where it got most popular. Actually, like Darwin was more popular on the continent in the beginning, but this kind of like new trend of Aryan naturalism, or like social Darwinism, and what finally became then the international like eugenic movement.
We started to look at this. Something that is like cutting across nation states, and that they have like a unified agenda, right?
Yes, that's really what I think we saw in this international conference. How like everybody was there, everybody had their representatives. Retzius had really done like his work, like of I mean, of course, he wasn't the only one to unify this field of racism, but there was a great sense of some kind of like white man's burden, and we saw how they started to behave. Then we moved a little bit further in time. We're creeping up towards like the ultimate skull religion, obviously, like the Totenkopfs of the Schwarze Korps, the SS. But we stopped first in Denmark, where, to our big and great surprise, we realized that like a lot of like, I think what we today think of maybe genetics, like Retzius, the Swedish guy, is a bit, I mean, nobody measures skulls today who is a geneticist. Like, I mean, even in bourgeois university settings, you get thrown out if you start doing that in the way that he did it. I mean, still, paleo archaeologists can still talk about skull measurements for, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Denisovans. Then the staircase model is perfectly fine. Then it's completely like the same kind of racism that we used to have at the turn of the century. Bigger skull, bigger brain, bigger power. It's so basic. Yeah. And then you have like the Neanderthal, which is a bit of an outlier because the skull is meant to be bigger, right? I think. I mean, maybe there are some of the other ones who are bigger as well. And then you have a lot of like fetishization around the Neanderthal as well, like because maybe it was white. And but in Denmark, what did we start to see there? We started seeing some really crazy things. Like, this is where we get the theory of like the pure line, for example, and you get into like more of the yeah, again, like what we today think of geneticism, with like this was the great surprise, right? Like that it was initially it seemed like
yeast company. If I
yeah,
recall.
exactly. Carlsberg brewery trying to find pure lines of yeast. Like at least that's why these scientists were paid. Of course, they would come to influence the rest of like genetics as well and eugenics. And they really like invented a lot of the words that we still use today, like pure line. I think even the word gene somewhere around here. Yeah, I can't go through like all but the vernacular, the jargon was very much invented here. And yeah, and I remember, Sebbe, you talked, like you mentioned like how abstract and like how absurd everything was starting to get now. That like if I would have told you like, oh, I've written like a sci-fi novel about like a brewing company that starts to like get into like eugenics to like to sterilize human beings because they want to like produce better beer, you would have been like, oh, I mean, come on, man, like it's just so silly. Stop making things up. And then but yeah, as what we saw was that actually this is kind of where it started on a big scale with sterilizations and that the Danish modern nation state had inherited a great complex of like aristocrats running these kind of insane asylums and penal colonies, because Denmark is like a big archipelago, right? So you can do a lot of weird fucked up things on these small islands. Like it's a bit like Scotland maybe. Like there are some places where like nobody, where even the king obviously hasn't been, and you had like they're like penal colonies by their very nature, right? And then they started to work on like and maybe a big interesting thing to mention here is that it was really a project by the Social Democrats, right? Which was another nail in the coffin for them. I think that this was like we can't always think Nazis and fascists. Like we have to see that like there were so many different political fields of the bourgeoisie interested in eugenics, because they did have a common fear of the proletariat's like growing population somehow. Yeah. And then we landed at the last episode. What did we do there, Sebbe? Do you want to summarize that?
No, I think that was when we brought it back to Sweden and the Institute for Racial
exactly, the house that Herman built.
Biology. And the guy that ran it, and his fascination with like the Sami people of north of Sweden, that he saw as his own little backyard, his own Peru, I think he called it. Yeah.
A lot of Perus being thrown around throughout this history for some reason.
Yeah.
Somebody did suggest in the comments that like the reason why we saw like in Linné's time they were referring to the Sami land as Swedish Peru. Then Herman Lundborg, is it Lundborg or Lundqvist? It's Lundborg, right? Yeah. He also referred to it as Sweden's Peru. And then I said that like I had read about the rail barons in Russia before the revolution, when the Siberian Railroad was built around the same time, right, at the turn of the last century. How they also refer to like Siberia as Russia's Peru. And then like somebody said in the comment like that this is probably something to do with like the Spaniard silver mines, right? Like that this, I think in Peru you had the biggest
I think so. And also
location of like,
isn't that where like El Dorado is supposed to be?
Yeah, so, well, Machu Picchu is definitely there, right? Like, is it in Chile?
Yeah, no, Machu Picchu is in Peru. Yes, it is. Yeah. But I mean, like the the
El Dorado, I think, is somewhere along. It's somewhere along the Amazonas. It's not in the mountains, so, because it's somebody gets lost on a raft. Sorry, somebody gets lost on a raft by mistake. This is the first account anyway of El Dorado, I think. But that's like the actual real historical account of habitation in the Amazonas. So you might be right.
But I think about it. Half of Peru is Amazonas, and I'm checking it now. It is Peru.
Okay.
But it should be somewhere, you know, in the like triangle between Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. So you know where the
like the northwestern part.
Yeah, where the like Amazonas start or end, depending on which way you come from.
Yeah,
but
I
so
think that's where
of course I think it has to do, you know, with like being a rich area, right? And this is how they saw it, because I don't remember if we talked about that or if it was cut, but it's I remember for the last episode we also talked about, you know, the northern part of Sweden being very rich in minerals and in like how do you say aquatic power or like hydropower.
Yes, you did talk about that.
So of course it was always a very it's like interlinked, right? All of these like explorations back from the 19th century and onwards is always closely linked and funded by like trading companies, going to modern companies, etc. So you can get like mineral rights and excavation, etc. So it's a good business for everybody, except for the people that live there, of course.
Yeah. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, the final analysis must be that even like the highest stages of Aryo-Sophic thinking, like everything that we talked about, you know, from all of these angles, linguistics, geography, physical anthropology, all of these have a common economic base as well, right? Like, I mean, the unification of Retzius within the superstructure of like having all European scientists agree on common notions of racism aren't in themselves a driving engine of history, right? Like they're doing this to sort of to excuse to their own public and to motivate themselves the forward movement of their own imperialism.
Yeah, and I think we see this. We will see this a little bit later in today's episode as well. But you know, a lot of the factions and like the superstructure involved with, you know, the more fascistic side of the bourgeois are usually stemmed from like heavy industry, right? So like agriculture and mining companies, etc.
Yes, and
it's
the
not
timber
so much
barons.
That it's like the retailers.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like somebody in a, you know, crafting their own mittens in a little mongler shop in the city. No, of course not. Like it's already, yes, quite like their economic base is already international, which forces them to think about these things. And I think that's like, I mean, it's telling that we never went so far back. But like if we would have done, I guess like if our series would have been about racism, just in general, then I think usually historians often like to start like with the Iberian empires, right? But I think what you see there, and which is why we didn't involve it so much, is that you have much more like religious notions about it. Like it hasn't reached this kind of natural historical level yet. So like you have this notion of limpieza de sangre. I think is one. I can't remember if he was Portuguese or Spanish, but there were a lot of like Catholic propagandists defending their imperialism as well, obviously, like in South and Central America, and in other places as well, in Southeast Asia and in the island Southeast Asia.
Yeah, but then we're not talking about imperialism in the Leninist sense of like the economic exploitation. Then it's more pre-capitalist society, like a feudal colonialism
with a religious superstructure as well, right? Like,
but I think what we wanted to do here is to impart on the audience like some form of skepticism towards academia in general. Because I think maybe not in the US today, which seems to be like becoming more conservative in some ways. But I think like for a lot of people in general, it's easier to accept, a critique of religion, right? But what we wanted to do was a critique of the modern bourgeois science, and it's not that we're Philistines and against science, of course not.
No.
But it's paraphrasing from Trump, in his first term when he said that they should close the borders until they figure it out. I think the same could be applied for modern academia. That,
somehow,
it would probably be the best for everybody to just shut it all down and figure it out.
Yeah, but I mean, they have done that already in America since even Trump appeared in Home Alone, right? Like I think in the late 80s, I think like there was like a golden period of like American academia where you actually had like an expansion, right? And like more people than before were like welcomed in, so that you actually had working class people in the universities. I read an article about this like recently, like how long ago it actually already stopped. Like I mean, we are sort of like entering this decline now in the north, like in Scandinavia. England probably already entered it like 20 years ago, but I think like for America it's like 1.5 generation ago or something like that it was already like I don't know, the Humboldtian project that we also did talk about at one point, like that began in earnest after the war to involve working class people, that already sort of started to disappear. I can't really put a date. I want to say like end of the 80s, if I remember the article correctly. So maybe like in a reverse way then, Sebbe, it's like I don't know, like then this project will serve an even higher purpose somehow, because of course people are still exposed to these things. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like I think like maybe if more people went to university, not becoming members of academia, I'm not saying that, but at least then you have a little bit of like defense, because you're already sort of, if you think of your own few years in university, you left quickly because you couldn't stand it, but it doesn't take long to start to also see that like this kind of the adult in the room thing, like that they don't really know either what they are doing, but
because they're like dealers, being high on their own supply, and that's a pretty bad dealer. It served a purpose in before, but then they started believing their own bullshit, right? Especially, and it's different from like science to science, but especially like within the social sciences, which was made to like combat the East Bloc, right?
And I think like if we hold true to our own class analysis, you not to sound like a race scientist, but you need new blood into the academia. Otherwise, it's like it's already self-reproductive. But if you cut off like people's availability to enter academia, like on similar terms as the members of the old aristocracy or the petty bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie, you're only going to have like explanatory models that fits them. Like and that we know that like from other fields where invention actually does take place, like on the industrial floor of the factories, where people are exposed to real problems of production. That's where the invention starts to happen. And it is of course the same thing for the social sciences. Like I mean, if you haven't lived in segregated areas, or like in shanty towns, or in like the projects, how can you be like a social scientist to talk about like structural racism, or that even maybe the tendency of the profit to fall, etc., etc. Like, of course, this necessitates itself. Like, I hope, what you just said. Maybe this critique then, like to see that there is a lot of like shadiness going around at the birth and also later for these sciences. Like maybe, hopefully, we will tarnish the halo that surrounds them as like, royal roads towards truth, etc., etc. And do we want to say something then? I think that's a pretty good summary. Do we want to say something about maybe where we are going?
Yeah, I can just give it a short introduction or try to keep it short in like a minute or two. But what we want to go from here is, with this season 2, is to we laid the like theoretical groundwork. So instead of mapping out in each division of science, because you could do the same with psychology, sociology, anthropology, etc., etc. It would like take ages, right? But what we want to go here is like to move forward in history and to see it going from a more theoretical framework to becoming an applied science, right? With operators within the state that are trying to enact these old policies, and this is.
I think that's a nice word, right? Like, because before we had the, we said that we made a jump from possibility to necessity, and now we're gonna jump from the position of necessity to enactment, somehow.
Yeah. So I think that summarizes it. Without spoiling the details.
Yeah, you're very much against spoiling the topics of even though we have a pretty good skeleton laid out for us. I have begun to agree with you as well, and yeah, of course. And but you suggested that, like, maybe some people will be able to figure out where we're going from this due to the topic of the first episode, which this is going to be a heavy Sebbe episode. You've done much of the research, and this is like an old I remember you talking about this for like a long time, and now you did finally find a few books that did talk about it, and I think it's really like to your credit that like you were onto something. Like the fact that there was so little written about this, and that even when it's written about, it's not really like somebody is acknowledging it. Which makes it even more interesting, which makes it like something that, should be the kind of stuff that we take up on this show, because otherwise you can go to any history like show. If, for example, what we're talking about racism, I'm sure there are loads of like podcast series about the history of racism that you can indulge in. Not that I think this audience is that kind of an audience, but, just an argument, should anybody want to sell it to somebody else as well. But what do you have for us today? Thank you for listening, dear listener. You have just received an hour-long preview of the latest Skullboys series. If you want to listen to the rest of this series, please sign up on the Patreon, as I am doing my very best to make sure that this third Christmas of doing this full-time will be, finally, one where I no longer have to toil under minimum wage. You can help make sure that this will be the case, and by doing so you will also receive the first season in its entirety and many other shows which all in all constitutes far more research and listening hours than any audiobook monthly fee that I know of. I am a clinical psychotic thrown out of more than one university who, despite 2 or 3 degrees in history, depending on how you count, cannot maintain a regular office job. I have tried. Believe me, I have a small family to feed, so I have tried. Instead, while cultivating the lands up here in a cheap faraway village of the Alps, providing rice for old and young, I do what I love, which is to read about that which I believe to be our predicament. Having been a high school teacher in the past in Sweden, China and Japan and many other educational settings where I have found myself during my wanderings, I do not like to do this reading only for myself, and that is why I need your support. Please, support the show on Patreon so that I can continue this work. Thank you.